Hello, folks. I'm happy. At 50, I live deep in the wild, trusting my animal friends more than people. Yet, this story of a humble father teaching his wealthy son a priceless lesson inside a luxury car showroom truly warmed my heart. Where are you listening from today? Comment below and please subscribe. The morning sun in Austin, Texas, was already beginning to bake the black asphalt by 10 o'clock, casting a relentless, shimmering heat over the sprawling, rapidly modernizing city. The air carried the faint, dry scent of dust and exhaust fumes, a testament to a town caught halfway between its rugged, blue-collar roots and a newfound, gleaming wealth brought in by the tech boom. I am Wilder. At 55, I have spent the better part of my life out in the untamed wilderness, learning to trust the honest silence of animals far more than the calculated words of men. But occasionally, I venture into the concrete jungles to observe my own species. I watch people in their natural, modern habitats, because it is in these sterile, constructed environments that the truest colors of the human soul are inevitably revealed. On this particular Tuesday morning, I was sitting quietly in the plush, leather-scented customer lounge of Harlan Prestige Autos, sipping a complimentary espresso and watching an entirely preventable tragedy of pride unfold. Outside the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the luxury dealership, an old vehicle pulled into the pristine parking lot. It was a 12-year-old Ford F-150. Its once bright red paint faded to a dull, chalky rust by over a decade of unforgiving Texas sun. The truck rattled to a halt, looking entirely out of place surrounded by imported German sports cars and gleaming Italian sedans. The driver's side door creaked open, and a man stepped out into the heavy heat. This was Robert Harlan, though anyone who knew him for more than 5 minutes simply called him Bob. Bob was a man in his late 60s, built like the foundation of a sturdy house. He was a retired commercial electrician who had spent 40 years pulling thick copper wires through the dark, suffocating crawl spaces of city buildings. His physical appearance was a direct map of his life's hard labor. His hands were large, permanently calloused, and stained with the ghosts of grease and machine oil. He wore a faded, well-worn denim work shirt, sturdy canvas trousers, and heavily scuffed steel-toe boots that had walked miles of concrete floors. Bob possessed a face lined with deep, sun-beaten wrinkles and a pair of warm, incredibly gentle brown eyes. He was a man of quiet, unshakable dignity. He had built a modest, honorable life with his bare hands, and his greatest pride was not his bank account, but his son, Michael. Michael Harlan was the ambitious, driven owner of this very showroom, a man who had taken his father's relentless work ethic and applied it to the world of high-end luxury sales. Bob had come to the dealership this morning just to surprise his boy, bringing a box of the kolaches Michael had loved since he was a kid. As Bob pushed open the heavy glass doors, the climate-controlled air of the showroom rushed over him. The interior of Harlan Prestige Autos was designed to be deliberately intimidating a temple of wealth, featuring polished marble floors, sleek chrome fixtures, and perfectly angled lighting that made the million-dollar inventory look like museum pieces. Standing near a pristine, silver European convertible was a young woman named Emily. Emily was 23 years old, a recent college graduate who had only been working as a junior floor assistant for 4 months. She was petite, with soft, observant features, her dark hair tied back neatly, clutching a pristine clipboard to her chest like a protective shield. Emily was a gentle soul, completely out of place in this hyper-competitive environment. She was inherently empathetic, a trait that made luxury sales incredibly difficult for her. As she watched the elderly man in the faded denim shirt wander onto the showroom floor, looking around with a mix of awe and fatherly pride, her heart gave a strange, painful flutter. Looking at Bob's rough, working man's clothes, Emily was instantly transported back to a deeply painful memory. She remembered being 10 years old, holding her grandmother's hand at a prestigious downtown bank. Her grandmother had worn her only clean, though faded, floral dress to ask for a small loan, and Emily would never forget the look of absolute, dismissive contempt on the loan officer's face. The banker had humiliated her grandmother simply because she looked poor. It was an injustice that had permanently shaped Emily's worldview, making her fiercely sensitive to the quiet cruelties of social class. Before Emily could step forward to greet the old man with a smile, someone else intercepted him. It was Derek Vance. Derek was the showroom's top salesman, a man in his mid-30s who wore his arrogance exactly like he wore his slim-fit three-piece Italian suit, tightly and without apology. Derek had sharp, predatory features, perfectly gelled hair, and a smile that he could turn on and off like a light switch, depending on the perceived net worth of the person standing in front of him. In Derek's world, a human being's value was entirely calculable. He evaluated men by the brand of the watch on their wrist and the cut of the leather on their shoes. To him, anyone who didn't look like money was nothing more than a waste of his valuable time. Derek had been watching Bob from across the floor, his eyes narrowing in undisguised disgust at the sight of the scuffed work boots stepping onto the imported Italian marble. He adjusted his silk tie, plastered on a cold, tightly controlled smile, and walked deliberately into Bob's path, blocking the older man from getting any closer to the expensive vehicles. Bob stopped, offering the young salesman a warm, genuine smile. "Morning," Bob said, his voice carrying the deep, gravelly warmth of a man who knew how to treat his neighbors. "Beautiful place you've got here." Derek did not return the smile. He looked Bob up and down, a slow, theatrical appraisal that was designed entirely to make the older man feel painfully small. His eyes lingered on the frayed edges of Bob's denim collar and the dust on his boots. When Derek finally spoke, his voice was smooth, highly polished, and dripping with absolute condescension. "May I help you?" Derek asked, the question sounding more like a demand for justification than an offer of assistance. Before Bob could even open his mouth to answer, Derek let out a short, scoffing laugh, shaking his head slightly. "Actually, let's be honest. Looking at you, I assume you must just be waiting for someone, or perhaps looking for the service alley. Because you certainly aren't here to buy a car." From a few yards away, Emily stood frozen, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her clipboard. The echo of the banker who had humiliated her grandmother rang loudly in her ears. A fierce, protective anger flared in her chest, urging her to step forward, to defend the kind-eyed old man in the denim shirt, to tell Derek to back off. But the paralyzing fear of losing her desperately needed job after only 4 months kept her anchored to the floor. She watched the brutal humiliation unfold in the pristine, quiet showroom, her heart breaking, locked in an agonizing internal battle between her conscience and her survival. Chapter 2. The Past and a Father's Silent Test. The sheer arrogance dripping from Derek Vance's words hung heavily in the chilled, overly conditioned air of the showroom. Most men in Bob Harlan's position would have immediately flushed with anger, raised their voices, or demanded to speak to a manager. Some might have even proudly declared their identity right then and there to wipe the smug, practiced smirk off the young salesman's face. But Bob was not most men. Standing in his scuffed steel-toe boots on the imported Italian marble, holding the small white cardboard box of warm kolaches, Bob did not erupt. Instead, a profound, quiet sadness settled deep within his chest. He looked past Derek's tailored Italian suit and expensive silk tie, his mind violently pulled back through the relentless current of time, returning to a sweltering, unforgiving Austin summer exactly 10 years ago. Before the multi-million-dollar glass facades, before the imported European sports cars, there was only a tiny, suffocatingly hot, oil-stained cinder-block garage on the gritty east side of the city. That crumbling structure was where his son, Michael, had taken his very first terrifying step into the automotive business. Bob remembered those grueling early days vividly. After finishing his own exhausting 10-hour shifts pulling heavy electrical cables, Bob would drive his beat-up Ford F-150 straight to Michael's garage. Under the harsh, flickering glow of cheap fluorescent tube lights, father and son would work side by side until 2 in the morning, their hands black with engine grease, fixing alternators and replacing brake pads on rusty, dying sedans. It was in that very garage that Bob had handed Michael a heavily creased manila envelope containing $40,000, his entire life savings, meticulously hoarded from decades of hard physical labor. Bob had absolutely no hesitation in giving his son everything he had, but he had offered it with one strict, unbreakable condition. He had looked Michael dead in the eyes and said, "A man's worth is never measured by the fabric of his coat or the dirt on his hands, Mikey. You treat the man walking in with pennies with the exact same respect as the man walking in with millions. Never forget where you came from." Over the last decade, Michael had taken that garage and miraculously transformed it into a sprawling luxury empire. Bob was incredibly, overwhelmingly proud of his son's monumental success. However, Bob still spent his mornings drinking black coffee at the local blue-collar diners, and in a town like Austin, whispers traveled faster than a wildfire. Over the past year, Bob had begun to hear troubling rumors from the local tradesmen and old friends. They whispered that Harlan Prestige Autos had grown elitist, cold, and arrogant. They said the company had systematically begun to push away the working-class community that had supported Michael when he was just a kid turning wrenches in the dirt. Deeply troubled by the terrifying thought that his son's legacy was losing its moral compass, Bob had made a silent, painful decision. He had decided to come to the showroom this morning unannounced, dressed exactly as he always was, to conduct a silent test. He wanted to see firsthand what kind of culture his son was brewing. Looking at Derek's sneering face, Bob tragically received the exact confirmation he had been dreading. The company had forgotten its roots. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the quiet, heartbreaking drama unfolding on the ground floor, Michael Harlan sat trapped in a different kind of storm on the second level. The executive suite was a massive soundproofed glass box hovering above the showroom, completely detached from the reality of the floor below. Michael was 32 years old, inheriting his father's strong, dependable jawline and thick, dark hair. However, unlike his father's rugged simplicity, Michael was impeccably styled. He wore a razor-sharp midnight blue bespoke suit that fit him perfectly, radiating the aura of a highly successful CEO. Yet, underneath the expensive wool, Michael looked profoundly exhausted. The relentless, crushing pressure of maintaining a luxury empire had carved premature stress lines deep around his dark eyes. He looked like a man who had successfully conquered the world, only to realize the crown was incredibly heavy and entirely suffocating. Sitting directly across the polished mahogany desk from Michael was his chief financial officer, Richard Hayes. Richard was a newly hired executive, a man in his late 40s who had been ruthlessly poached from a rival luxury brand in New York. Richard was incredibly thin, possessing sparse, slick-back gray hair and cold, calculating green eyes that peered sharply through frameless wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a severe gray suit and spoke with a clipped, emotionless efficiency. Richard viewed the entire world exclusively through the clinical lens of spreadsheets, profit margins, and demographic targeting. To him, human empathy was nothing more than a useless, costly liability in the high-end luxury market. Richard confidently pushed a sleek digital tablet across the desk, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a soaring green graph. "We are looking at a record-breaking quarter, Michael," Richard said smoothly, his voice devoid of any real warmth. "Our aggressive new upselling tactics, combined with our premium client filtering protocols, are yielding magnificent margins. The upscale rebranding is a complete financial triumph." But Michael wasn't looking at the soaring profit curve. His tired, bloodshot eyes were fixated on a secondary hidden metric, buried deep in the report: the Customer Grievance Index. "The profits are undoubtedly up, Richard. But look at the concealed complaints," Michael replied, his voice heavy as he aggressively rubbed his throbbing temples. "We have a 30% spike in negative feedback specifically regarding staff arrogance and dismissive behavior. People are saying we look down on them. They are saying we are completely unapproachable. We are bleeding our community goodwill dry." Richard scoffed softly, adjusting his glasses with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We sell luxury, Michael, not charity. Exclusivity naturally demands a certain level of gatekeeping. If a walk-in customer feels intimidated by our environment or our staff, it simply means they do not belong in our target demographic. We cannot afford to waste our top salesman's time on people who are just here to look at things they can never afford. Michael fell entirely silent, a heavy, sickening feeling settling like a stone in the pit of his stomach. He looked away from Richard's cold green eyes and turned his gaze to a small, slightly faded photograph resting on the corner of his immaculate desk. It was a picture of him and his father, Bob, both covered in black grease, laughing in that tiny, sweltering cinderblock garage 10 years ago. Looking at his father's genuine, warm smile in the photo, Michael felt incredibly, devastatingly lost. He realized, with a horrifying clarity, that he had built an impenetrable castle of glass and steel, but in the process, he had completely lost the foundation. Surrounded by million-dollar assets and suffocated by cold corporate logic, Michael desperately missed the grounding, honest wisdom of his father. He wished more than anything that Bob were sitting in the room right now to tell him how to fix the rotting soul of his company. He sat there, agonizing over his lost values, completely and tragically unaware that his father was standing just a few feet below him, silently enduring the exact toxic arrogance Michael was so terrified his company had become. Chapter 3. The Test and the Cold Stares. The pristine, climate-controlled air of Harlan Prestige Autos felt increasingly heavy and suffocating as Bob Harlan deliberately ignored Derek Vance's humiliating opening remark. Instead of retreating, the elderly retired electrician turned his warm, weathered gaze toward the absolute centerpiece of the showroom floor. Resting on a rotating, illuminated platform was a breathtaking 2026 Mustang GT, painted in a deep, aggressive cherry red that seemed to catch and amplify every beam of overhead light. Bob slowly walked toward the magnificent machine, his scuffed steel-toe boots squeaking faintly against the polished marble. He admired the sleek, aerodynamic curves and the fierce, muscular stance of the vehicle. For a moment, he was just a man appreciating a beautiful piece of engineering. He turned back to Derek, who had reluctantly followed him with a look of supreme irritation, and politely asked, "She's a real beauty. What's the sticker price on a model like this? And how does the new powertrain hold up compared to the older V8S?" Derek let out a sharp, highly exaggerated laugh that echoed across the quiet showroom, specifically designed to draw the attention of the other salespeople. He crossed his arms over his tailored Italian suit, not even bothering to pull the spec sheet from his pocket. "Look, old man," Derek said loudly, completely abandoning any pretense of professional courtesy. "You couldn't possibly afford the insurance on this car, let alone the sticker price. I know exactly what you are doing. You just want to sit in the leather seats, play with the steering wheel, and take a picture to show your buddies at the diner. You're just looking for fun, and I don't have time for joyriders." Bob's gentle brown eyes remained remarkably calm, though the sorrow in his chest deepened. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood his ground, gripping the small box of kolaches, and continued with his deliberate test. "I understand you're a busy man, son," Bob replied evenly. "But a customer is a customer. I'd like to know about your current financing rates, the required down payment, and the extended warranty options for this specific GT." Derek's face flushed with genuine anger at the old man's stubborn persistence. He rolled his eyes dramatically, letting out a heavy sigh, and began rattling off numbers at lightning speed, using complex financial jargon and throwing in hidden fees, intentionally trying to confuse and intimidate Bob into leaving the premises. Standing half-concealed behind a massive marble pillar just a few yards away, Emily watched the entire agonizing interaction unfold. Her heart pounded furiously against her ribs. While she was terrified of losing her junior sales position, she was also incredibly observant. Outside of this soul-crushing day job, Emily was a dedicated evening student, pursuing her master's degree in business administration, writing her final thesis specifically on the catastrophic effects of toxic service culture in modern luxury retail. Seeing a textbook example of corporate cruelty happening right in front of her, Emily reached into the pocket of her tailored skirt. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her smartphone and discreetly hit the record button. She wasn't capturing the audio to humiliate Derek on the internet. She was documenting it as a raw, undeniable case study of how a company's internal culture could rot from the inside out. when empathy was entirely replaced by greed. As her phone quietly recorded Derek's escalating rudeness, Emily's sharp eyes caught another deeply troubling interaction happening near the front entrance. A new customer had just walked through the glass doors. It was a woman named Sarah. Sarah was a single mother in her early 30s, possessing a kind but profoundly exhausted face. She wore a neat, practical navy pencil skirt and a beige blazer that was slightly faded at the elbows, clearly an outfit she had worn to a long day at a modest office job. She was heavily burdened, balancing a bulky floral diaper bag on one shoulder while holding the hand of a sleepy, curly-haired toddler. Sarah looked around the dazzling showroom with a sense of hopeful hesitation, desperately needing a reliable, safe SUV for her small family. Before Emily could even take a step toward her, another salesman practically materialized out of thin air. This was Marcus, a slick, 28-year-old junior associate who viewed Derek as a mentor. Marcus had heavily gelled blonde hair, wore an incredibly flashy oversized gold watch, and reeked of an aggressive, overpowering cologne. Marcus took one swift, calculating look at Sarah's faded blazer and the cheap brand of her diaper bag, instantly mentally categorizing her as a low-commission liability. He didn't even offer her a formal greeting or ask what kind of safety features she was looking for. Instead, Marcus immediately stepped into her path, physically blocking her from viewing the gleaming row of new luxury SUVs. "Ma'am, let me save us both some time," Marcus said with a tight, completely hollow smile, subtly pointing his hand toward the side exit. "The vehicles on this floor are premium tier. However, if you step out those side doors and walk around to the back alley, you'll find our used and certified pre-owned lot. I think that inventory will be much better suited for your particular budget constraints." Sarah's face instantly fell, a hot flush of deep embarrassment creeping up her neck as she quietly tightened her grip on her toddler's hand and obediently turned toward the back door, practically chased out of the showroom. Emily stood frozen behind her pillar, her chest tight with a sickening mixture of anger and grief. The systemic arrogance wasn't just a Derek problem. It was a devastating plague that had infected the entire floor. Having gathered all the heartbreaking evidence he needed, Bob quietly thanked Derek for his time and slowly walked away from the beautiful red Mustang. He didn't leave the dealership entirely. Instead, he pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the suffocating, sweltering heat of the Austin morning. He found a small, shaded wooden bench in the dealership's landscaped courtyard and sat down heavily, resting the box of kolaches on his knees. He looked incredibly old and profoundly weary, mourning the loss of the humble, respectful culture he had tried so hard to instill in his son 10 years ago. Inside, Emily finally made a decision. She stopped her recording, slid the phone back into her pocket, and walked purposefully to the staff break room. She grabbed 2 icy-cold bottles of mineral water from the pristine glass refrigerator. Pushing past the intimidating glass doors, she stepped out into the overwhelming Texas heat, the sudden wave of humidity immediately clinging to her dark hair. She walked softly over to the shaded bench and held out one of the frosted, dripping bottles to Bob. Bob looked up, his gentle brown eyes widening in mild surprise. He took the bottle with his calloused, grease-stained hands. "Thank you, miss. That's mighty kind of you," he said, his gravelly voice thick with genuine gratitude. Emily sat down on the far edge of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance but offering a warm, profoundly empathetic smile. "I'm Emily," she introduced herself softly, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "And I wanted to deeply apologize for how you were treated in there. You didn't deserve that. Nobody does." Bob took a long, slow drink of the freezing water, letting the cool relief wash over him. He looked at the young woman, instantly recognizing the rare, uncorrupted kindness in her eyes. It was the exact same spark of decency he had always hoped his son would maintain. "It's all right, Emily. Don't you worry about an old man like me." Bob smiled, a small, knowing twinkle returning to his tired eyes. "Sometimes, you just have to step back and see the dirt in the daylight, so you know exactly where you need to start cleaning." Chapter 4. The Moment of Arrival and a Quiet Retribution. The oppressive Texas heat radiating from the concrete courtyard was a stark contrast to the icy, artificial chill inside Harlan Prestige Autos. Sitting on the shaded wooden bench, Bob Harlan was just finishing his mineral water, deeply appreciating the quiet, unexpected kindness of the young junior assistant, Emily. Inside the showroom, however, Derek Vance was watching them through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, his sharp features twisted into a scowl of supreme irritation. To Derek, the elderly man in the faded denim shirt was not just a nuisance, he was a loiterer, tarnishing the ultra-premium aesthetic of the dealership. Unwilling to let the old man ruin the pristine view for potential high-net-worth clients, Derek picked up his radio and sharply ordered security to clear the courtyard. A moment later, the heavy glass doors pushed open, and Hank stepped out into the heat. Hank was the daytime security supervisor, a heavy-set, 55-year-old former local police officer with a thick, bristly gray mustache and a uniform shirt that stretched tightly across his barrel chest. Hank was not an inherently cruel man. He was simply a tired veteran of the workforce who strictly followed orders, especially those barking from the dealership's top earner. He walked heavily over to the bench, his thumbs hooked casually into his utility belt, and offered Bob a gruff, apologetic nod. "Listen, buddy, I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the premises," Hank rumbled, gesturing vaguely toward the street. "This is private property for active customers only. You can't be loitering here." Bob did not argue. He offered Hank a gentle, understanding smile, knowing the man was just doing his job, and slowly began to stand up, picking up his small box of kolaches. Emily, still standing nearby, felt her stomach drop. The injustice of it all, a kind, harmless old man being treated like a criminal, was too much to bear. She knew she was just a junior assistant, easily replaceable, but her conscience screamed at her to act. Stepping out of Hank's line of sight, she pulled out her smartphone. She opened the company's internal emergency communication app, a direct channel usually reserved for reporting severe operational failures to upper management. Bypassing her immediate supervisor, Emily attached the video file she had recorded of Derek's horrific behavior. In the text box, she typed a single urgent sentence. "Mr. Harlan, this is how your top staff is treating people on the floor right now. It is a systemic failure." With a trembling thumb, she hit send, routing it directly to the CEO, Michael Harlan. Upstairs in the soundproofed executive suite, Michael was still violently rubbing his temples, trying to shake off the nauseating conversation he had just had with his chief financial officer about the company's soulless, profit-driven direction. Suddenly, his tablet chimed with a high-priority alert. Frowning, Michael opened the notification. It was a direct message from a junior employee named Emily. He tapped the attached video file. Instantly, the crystal-clear audio filled the quiet office. Michael heard Derek's condescending, sneering voice, mocking a customer for not being able to afford a car. Then, a second voice spoke up. It was a deep, gravelly, incredibly gentle voice, asking about financing and down payments. Michael's heart completely stopped in his chest. He didn't just recognize the voice, it was carved into his very soul. Michael stared at the screen, his blood running cold as ice. He watched his father, the man who had bled and starved to give him his first garage, the man whose values were the very foundation of this empire, being ruthlessly humiliated by a salesman in a tailored suit. The sheer devastation of the moment was paralyzing. But as the video continued, Michael's shock morphed into a profound, terrifying clarity. The fact that a junior assistant felt compelled to secretly record this meant it was not an isolated incident. It was an epidemic. The soaring profits, the sanitized showroom, the arrogant dismissals of single mothers and working-class men, it was all a symptom of the same disease. His company was rotting from the inside out. Without a single word, Michael dropped the tablet onto his desk, shoved his heavy mahogany chair back, and sprinted out of the executive suite. He flew down the grand glass staircase, taking the steps two at a time, his pristine midnight blue suit jacket flapping behind him. Down on the floor, Hank had just placed a heavy hand on Bob's shoulder, gently but firmly guiding the elderly man toward the exit doors. Derek stood nearby, leaning against a display vehicle with a smug, victorious smirk on his face. Dad? The single booming word echoed like a gunshot across the cavernous marble-floored showroom. The sheer volume and raw emotion in Michael's voice made every single person in the building freeze instantly. Customers stopped talking. Salesmen lowered their brochures. Hank quickly pulled his hand away from Bob's shoulder, looking around in utter confusion. Derek's smug smirk vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. He watched in slow motion as the billionaire owner of Harlan Prestige Autos, a man who rarely left the executive suite, marched straight past the million-dollar sports cars. Michael didn't look at Derek. He didn't look at Hank. He walked directly to the elderly man in the faded denim shirt, wrapping his arms tightly around Bob in a fierce, protective embrace. Bob patted his son's back with a calloused hand, whispering a quiet, reassuring word. When Michael finally pulled away, he turned to face the showroom. The loving son disappeared, instantly replaced by the formidable, commanding CEO. He did not scream. He did not throw a tantrum or curse. Instead, his voice was terrifyingly calm, carrying a cold, quiet authority that sent shivers down the spine of every employee present. Michael looked directly at the head of security. "Hank," Michael said smoothly, his eyes scanning the dead-silent room. "Lock the front doors. Pull the grills down. Put the closed for private events sign in the window. We are closing the showroom for 45 minutes. Hank swallowed hard, nodding frantically. "Yes, sir, right away." Michael then turned his dark, penetrating gaze to the sales floor. "I want every single employee, sales, service, reception, and management, standing in the center of this floor in exactly 2 minutes. If anyone leaves, they do not need to come back tomorrow." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek Vance stood entirely frozen near the cherry-red Mustang, the color completely draining from his sharp, predatory face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He had just brutally humiliated a working-class man for sport, only to discover he had relentlessly mocked the father of the Empire's king. As the heavy locks clicked on the front doors, sealing the employees inside, everyone knew a reckoning had arrived, and it was going to be mercilessly just. Chapter 5. The Meeting and a Lesson in Fairness. The heavy, metallic clatter of the security grills descending over the floor-to-ceiling glass windows echoed like a judge's gavel through the cavernous showroom of Harlan Prestige Autos. The outside world of sweltering Austin heat and bustling traffic was entirely shut out, leaving only the suffocating, tense silence of 35 terrified employees gathered in the center of the imported Italian marble floor. Mechanics in greased overalls, receptionists in sharp blazers, and elite salesmen in bespoke suits stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes darting nervously toward the center of the room. Standing there, radiating a quiet, formidable authority, was Michael Harlan. Beside him stood his father, Bob, still clutching the small cardboard box of kolaches, his weathered face etched with a mixture of sorrow and gentle understanding. Michael did not immediately address the terrified staff. Instead, in front of the entire company, the billionaire CEO turned to the elderly man in the faded denim work shirt. Michael took a deep, shaky breath, allowing the impenetrable corporate armor he had worn for years to shatter completely. "Dad," Michael said, his voice thick with raw emotion, carrying clearly across the dead silent room. 10 years ago, you gave me your entire life savings in a boiling hot cinder block garage. But more importantly, you gave me a promise to uphold. You told me that a man's worth is never measured by his clothes, and that every soul who walks through my doors deserves absolute respect. In my blind pursuit of expansion and profit, I allowed this company to forget you. I allowed it to forget where we came from. For that, I am deeply, profoundly sorry." Michael bowed his head, a gesture of absolute humility that struck the watching employees like a physical blow. Bob's eyes filled with tears, and he reached out, resting his heavy, calloused hand on his son's shoulder, a silent gesture of immediate, unconditional forgiveness. With his moral compass violently realigned, Michael turned slowly to face the crowd. His dark eyes locked directly onto Derek Vance, The top salesman was standing near the front, looking as though the floor might swallow him whole. His previously flawless hair was slightly disheveled, and the arrogant, predatory smirk had been entirely replaced by the pale, trembling mask of a man awaiting execution. "Derek, step forward," Michael commanded, his voice cold and perfectly level. Derek swallowed hard, his expensive leather shoes squeaking faintly against the marble as he took 2 steps out of the crowd. "I watched the video of how you treated my father," Michael began, crossing his arms. "I also know about Sarah, the single mother you chased out to the used lot an hour ago. Explain yourself, and do not lie to me." Derek opened his mouth, but for a long moment, no words came out. His polished salesman persona had completely evaporated. What very few people in the showroom knew was that Derek Vance had not been born into the luxury he so aggressively weaponized. He had been raised in a rusting, dilapidated trailer park in West Texas by a single mother who worked 3 grueling diner shifts just to keep the lights on. For the first 18 years of his life, Derek had been mocked, humiliated, and looked down upon by people driving the exact same cars he now sold. To survive the brutal landscape of high-end retail, Derek had built an impenetrable armor of extreme arrogance. He had falsely equated wealth with human decency, convincing himself that if he acted as ruthlessly as the rich men who had once stepped on his mother, he would finally be untouchable. I lost perspective, sir," Derek finally stammered, his voice cracking, staring down at the floor because he could not bear to look into Bob's gentle eyes. "I thought this was what the brand required. I thought exclusivity meant keeping certain people out. I forgot. I forgot what it feels like to be on the other side of that door." Michael watched Derek carefully, seeing past the tailored suit to the broken, misguided kid underneath. Firing Derek would be the easiest, most corporate solution, instantly satisfying the urge for revenge. But firing a man didn't teach him anything. It only relocated the toxicity. Michael looked at his father, remembering Bob's words about cleaning the dirt. "I am not going to fire you today, Derek," Michael said quietly, causing a ripple of shocked whispers to wash through the staff. Derek's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "But you are no longer our top salesman. As of this moment, you are stripped of your floor privileges. You have 2 choices. Option 1, you walk out those doors right now, clear out your desk, and never come back. Option 2, you undergo a mandatory, unpaid, 4-week, intensive retraining program focused entirely on community relations, empathy, and customer respect. Furthermore, you will personally track down every working-class customer you have dismissed this month, starting with my father and the young mother from this morning, and you will offer them a sincere, face-to-face apology. If you pass, you can return to the floor at the bottom rung. What is your choice?" Tears of genuine shame and overwhelming relief spilled over Derek's eyelashes. The armor was completely gone. "I'll take the training, Mr. Harlan. I will apologize to all of them." "I swear it." Michael nodded curtly, then shifted his gaze toward the back of the crowd. "Emily, please, come here." The 23-year-old junior assistant froze, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She clutched her clipboard to her chest and slowly walked to the center of the room, terrified she was about to be fired for bypassing the chain of command. Instead, Michael offered her a warm, profoundly respectful smile. "It takes immense courage for a junior employee to risk her livelihood to stand up to the top earner in the company," Michael said loudly, ensuring everyone heard. "I read your academic background, Emily. I know you are studying the effects of toxic service culture. Effective immediately, you are receiving a temporary promotion. For the next month, you will be the lead director of our internal culture restructuring program. You will be the one retraining Derek, and you will report directly to me." Emily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in shock before she managed a fierce, determined nod. She had finally found a place where her empathy was not a weakness, but the ultimate strength. With the disciplinary action settled, and the soul of the company officially placed on a new, honorable path, Michael dismissed the staff. As the employees quietly dispersed to their stations, contemplating the profound shift in their universe, Michael turned back to Bob. The heavy burden of the CEO was gone, leaving only the son. Without another word, Michael stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his father, burying his face in Bob's shoulder. Bob hugged him back fiercely, closing his eyes as a single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. It was their first real, unburdened embrace in years, a silent promise that no matter how high the glass towers grew, the foundation would never be forgotten again. Chapter 6. Happy Ending, Remembering the Roots. Exactly 1 month had passed since the heavy security grills of Harlan Prestige Autos were locked down for a reckoning. Outside, the suffocating Texas summer had finally broken, yielding to a crisp, golden autumn breeze that swept through the streets of Austin. Inside the dealership, an even more profound shift had taken place. The building still boasted the same imported Italian marble floors and the same million-dollar glass facades, but the oppressive, intimidating chill was entirely gone. In its place was a vibrant, welcoming warmth. At the front entrance, a beautiful new digital display proudly outlined the company's new transparent pricing policy, guaranteeing absolutely no hidden fees or predatory markups. A large, elegantly frosted glass plaque hung near the reception desk, boldly declaring the company's new core philosophy: customer is family. The sales floor was bustling, alive with the sound of genuine laughter and relaxed conversations, a stark contrast to the hushed, elitist silence of the past. Standing near the certified pre-owned section was Arthur Henderson. Arthur was a 72-year-old retired public high school history teacher. He was a small, fragile-looking man, with a gentle stoop to his shoulders, wearing a faded brown tweed jacket with carefully sewn patches on the elbows and thick, wire-rimmed glasses that magnified his kind, watery blue eyes. Arthur gripped a worn leather checkbook tightly in his trembling hands, looking incredibly nervous. He desperately needed a reliable, safe sedan to drive his ailing wife to her weekly medical appointments, but he was terrified of being swindled or humiliated in such a high-end establishment. Approaching him was Derek Vance. However, this was not the same Derek from a month ago. Gone was the slick, heavily gelled hair, the aggressive three-piece Italian suit, and the predatory, mocking smirk. Derek was now dressed in a clean, approachable light blue dress shirt, with the sleeves comfortably rolled up, his posture relaxed and open. The grueling, humbling 4 weeks of intensive empathy training under Emily's strict guidance had stripped away his toxic armor, forcing him to confront the painful insecurities of his own impoverished childhood. When Derek looked at Arthur Henderson, he no longer saw a low-commission liability. He saw a man who reminded him of his own hard-working grandfather. "Good morning, sir." "I'm Derek," he said, offering a warm, respectful smile that actually reached his eyes. "How can I help you and your family today?" Arthur blinked, surprised by the genuine courtesy. Slowly, he explained his tight budget and his wife's medical needs. Instead of aggressively upselling or steering the old man toward a terrible financing trap, Derek patiently walked Arthur through the inventory. He bypassed the flashy sports cars and led him directly to a beautiful, low-mileage hybrid sedan known for its unparalleled safety ratings. Derek spent an hour thoroughly explaining the warranty, and when it came time to discuss the price, Derek actively applied a newly implemented senior community discount to the invoice, ensuring the final cost was well below Arthur's modest budget. When Derek handed over the keys, Arthur's eyes filled with tears of gratitude as he shook the young salesman's hand. Derek felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth bloom in his chest, a profound, quiet satisfaction that a massive commission check had never once given him. Watching this entire interaction from a few yards away was Emily. She stood tall, no longer nervously clutching a clipboard like a protective shield, but holding a sleek digital tablet with absolute confidence. Her temporary role as the director of internal culture had been a massive, undeniable triumph. He actually listened to him, a deep, smooth voice noted from behind her. Emily turned to see Michael Harlan approaching, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his tailored suit. The heavy, exhausted shadows that used to haunt Michael's eyes were completely gone. replaced by the vibrant, grounded energy of a leader who had finally found his true north. He did more than listen, Mr. Harlan. Emily smiled proudly. He connected. Derek just secured a customer for life, not through intimidation, but through simple human decency. Michael nodded in profound agreement. He turned to face the 23-year-old woman who had bravely risked her job to save the soul of his empire. Emily, your temporary 4-week assignment is officially over, Michael said, his tone turning highly professional. Emily's breath hitched for a second, but Michael quickly smiled. Because effective immediately, I am officially offering you a permanent executive position. I want you as our full-time head of customer experience and service culture advisor. Name your salary. We desperately need your empathy to keep us anchored. Emily's face lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. The frightened girl who had watched her grandmother be humiliated by a banker was officially gone, replaced by a powerful woman who now had the authority to ensure no one would ever feel that pain in this building again. She shook Michael's hand firmly, accepting the role with immense gratitude. Just then, the heavy glass doors of the showroom pushed open. Bob Harlan walked in, wearing his signature faded denim shirt and scuffed steel-toe boots. But this time, no one sneered. The receptionist greeted him warmly by name, and several mechanics waved cheerfully from the service bay. Bob smiled, walking directly toward the center of the room, where the breathtaking, cherry-red 2026 Mustang GT was waiting. Michael walked over to meet his father, pulling a set of gleaming keys from his pocket. The paperwork is entirely finalized, Dad, Michael said, his voice thick with pride. With your trade-in and the ultimate friends and family discount, she is officially all yours. Bob reached out, his calloused, grease-stained fingers wrapping around the keys to the beautiful machine he had patiently admired a month ago. He looked at the gleaming red hood and then looked around the showroom. He saw Derek patiently showing Mr. Henderson how to connect his phone to the dashboard. He saw Emily confidently directing the floor staff. He saw a business that was no longer just a cold monument to wealth, but a true pillar of the Austin community. Come on, Mikey. Bob smiled, tossing the keys slightly in his hand. Let's take her for a spin. I know a great little barbecue spot just outside of town. Dinner is on me. Michael laughed, a bright, unburdened sound, and quickly followed his father out the doors. They climbed into the stunning red Mustang, the powerful engine roaring to life with a deep, satisfying growl. As Michael navigated the sleek sports car out of the pristine parking lot and onto the sun-drenched Texas highway, a comfortable, profound silence settled between them. The golden autumn sunset painted the horizon in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. Bob settled back into the luxurious leather passenger seat, watching the city skyline roll by. He turned his head slowly, his gentle brown eyes locking onto his son's face. The quiet pride radiating from the old electrician was entirely overwhelming. You know, son, Bob said softly, his gravelly voice filled with absolute, unconditional love. You have made me prouder today than when you sold your most expensive car. The story of Bob and Michael leaves us with a beautiful reminder that true wealth is never measured by the clothes we wear or the cars we drive. It is measured by the respect and kindness we show to others. In our busy daily lives, it is so easy to judge people by their appearance or to get lost in our own pursuit of success. We often forget that a simple act of patience, a warm smile, or a moment of understanding can completely change someone else's day. True success is remembering where we came from and treating every single person with dignity. If this story brought a little warmth to your day, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts, and please subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing these meaningful journeys with you. May God bless you and your family with health, peace, and a heart full of compassion. May He always guide your steps and surround you with people who see your true value. If you believe that kindness and respect are the most beautiful things a person can wear, please type Amen in the comments below.